here. And this is our second event in NLG's Week Against Mass Incarceration. So while everyone is getting settled, I want to give a land acknowledgement as well as a Stop Cop City statement. So the University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Alihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions in their communities at UO and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. We express our respect for all federally recognized tribal nations of Oregon. This includes the Burns Paiute tribe, the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, the Coquel Indian Tribe, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. We also express our respect for all other displaced Indigenous peoples who call this place that we call Oregon home. And NLG at Oregon Law would also like to express our solidarity with the forest defenders fighting against the construction of Cop City in Atlanta. Law enforcement detained at least 35 people in Atlanta on Sunday, March 5th at a Solidarity Music Festival over a mile away from the Cop City construction site. Among those arrested was an NLG legal observer. All of those arrests are part of an ongoing state repression and violence against racial and environmental justice protesters who are fighting to defend their communities from the harms of militarized policing and environmental degradation on stolen Muskogee land. Each of these instances, including the many protesters charged with domestic terrorism, makes clear that law enforcement views movement activists as enemies of the state. The destruction of the Woolani Forest will undoubtedly exacerbate the climate crisis and expand the policing of Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color in Atlanta. NLG firmly condemns arrests of any protesters, including medics, jail support, and legal observers. We are proud to contribute in whatever ways we can to advance the critical work of our movement allies, advocating for liberation and community care. NLG remains in solidarity with the movement to stop Cop City. Okay, and with that, and thank everyone so much for being here once again. Okay, I will turn this over to the panelists. So first of all, I will have all of our panelists introduce themselves and their connections to restorative justice. So we'll start this off with a question of how does the restorative justice process work at your respective organizations and programs? And because you're at the top of our screen, we will start with you, John.
Okay, thank you, Corinne. Everyone hear me okay? Great. Thanks for the invitation to be here. My name is John English, and I am the program director for the Conflict and Dispute Resolution, commonly known as CRES, master's program here in the School of Law. My connection to restorative justice have been involved in this work for a long time. Our program works to provide internship opportunities and other kinds of educational opportunities in this realm for our grad students. I'm a co-investigator on a federal grant that's focused on integrating restorative justice philosophies and practices in schools with my colleague Darren Riley on the call today. And I am a member of Restorative Justice Coalition of Oregon, a wonderful organization. I served on the coordinating council for 3 years a while back. So passionate about the work. And there was a follow-up question, right, Corinne?
Yeah. Oops. So how does the restorative justice process work for you and
Yeah.
in the programs that you help implement?
Yeah, let me just talk briefly about the work in schools, since that kind of is I guess, the most recent manifestation of my focus. We're trying to integrate these philosophies and practices into both high school and middle school systems recently. And how does it work? Well, it starts with paradigm shifts, training teachers and administrators and staff to think differently, to think restoratively. The dialogue with the talking piece as a responsive measure is one part of that can certainly help mitigate and decrease unnecessary suspensions and expulsions. But there's an equally, if not more important aspect of just building relationships, building social currency, building connection, using these dialogic processes to teach social emotional literacy as part of civic education that I think is really important and really promising. And so that's just a quick snapshot of some of the work that I've been involved in of late.
Great. Thank you, John. I really appreciate that. Okay, Tucker, same question. Introduce yourself, your connections. I know I threw quite a few questions at you, but how does the restorative justice process work at your organization?
Hey everyone, my name is Tucker Campbell. I am an attorney at the Public Defender Services of Lane County. So I exclusively do court-appointed criminal defense work. And I have been working at this office for 7 years now, but that includes the time I was working here while I was in law school. I was in the UO law class of 2020. So I've been a barred attorney for like 2.5 years. Restorative justice principles and I guess resolutions in a criminal case, there are a couple of different models for that that we see in Lane County Circuit Court. And I think we'll get into the particulars of what those are later. But for me, that would be an outcome that I would advocate for a client if it was an appropriate case. So you kind of do an analysis of the facts of your case and your client and the circumstances, and assuming that all of those things lend themselves to a restorative justice type outcome, that would be something that I would try to negotiate with the state or ask the court to impose. And again, I can talk about what those look like later, but that's basically just, it's a target for me to shoot for at the end of the day.
Great, thank you. And yeah, we do have a question specifically on that we will get to. So we will address it. Okay, and same question to you, Tristen. Please, you could introduce yourself and your connection to restorative justice.
Hi, my name is Tristen Edwards. I am a major felony attorney at Metropolitan Public Defense Office, which is in Portland. I come to this work as a lawyer who's been very interested in promoting the use of restorative justice as an alternative to prosecution. So I serve on RJCO's coordinating committee, like John had mentioned, and I also do a work through Governor Kotek now, getting used to saying that, her Racial Justice Council. And so my role on the Racial Justice Council's Criminal Justice Reform Committee allowed me to support some initiatives around the development of a restorative justice grant fund. That fund was established in 2021, and the initial round of grant awards were made in 2022. So I'm kind of connected to the 8 different programs that were funded through that program. And specifically, I serve as the defense attorney on the Multnomah County program, which is run through the Inside Alliance. And I feel as though the question of what is the model for your restorative justice grant program, I'm going to leave for my co-panelist, Stephen, because he is the director of the restorative justice program that my office kind of is in connection with, refers cases to. The one thing I will say about the process, because it's on the system side of things, but I'll let him handle what the actual magic of restorative justice looks like for our participants, is that our program is for specifically for violent felony offenses. The reason being that the data around restorative justice shows that it is most effective when used in instances where there has been a serious harm or threat of serious harm. And the program really does seek to be an alternative to prosecution. And so rather than in a diversion model where someone would plead guilty and then enter a program, in our model, once a client is enrolled in the program, their case is dismissed from the system and they proceed in a completely alternative path without any of the typical system markers that you would expect to see.
Great, thank you. And just because of your connection, I'll go ahead and turn now to Stephen, and then we'll go to Darren afterwards.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let's see. My name is Stephen Fowler. I'm the Director of Restorative Justice at the Inside Alliance. Yeah, I'm like thinking about like where to start. I think I love saying that I'm just a restorative justice practitioner, because though we talk about these systems and like the work that we're doing in spaces and places where it's tied to legal systems or school systems or whatnot, like I believe that restorative justice is a philosophy that you move through every single day. And so like I try to always start at that place of like, yes, we're doing system work, but also it is how you move and navigate through the world. And so like I just love to start with that before I start talking about the other things, because we have to see this as, oh, this is a paradigm shift. This is how we operate with ourselves, with each other. When we look in the mirror, when we're at the grocery store, like this work is like eternal. So with that being said, I am director of this new lovely program at the Inside Alliance, where we're collaborating with our wonderful technical assistant organization, who I'll talk about a little bit more later, Impact Justice, and the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office and Metropolitan Public Defenders, where we have this wonderful pre-indictment model, where if someone is enrolled, which we get our cases from the district attorneys and, you know, in collaboration with Metropolitan Public Defenders, then their criminal charges are paused upon enrollment in the program, and they are only reinstated if the restorative process is not completed. And I'll talk a little bit later on like what that completion looks like. But in this model, as Tristen was saying, like we are focusing on high-level crimes because these show an outstanding, huge impacts on the Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color in Multnomah County, which is another way of like we've created an equitable process of getting to the underserved communities and really providing a service that not only is wanted, but needed for the healing and health of our community. I'm gonna be honest with you, I already forgot the question, so I'm just rambling at this point. If there was,
yeah, it was a kind of tripart question. So we'll turn to Darren, have him kind of introduce himself, and then we'll go back to you guys with some specifics. Okay, great, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Darren Riley. I am the Restorative Justice in Schools Program Manager for the Center for Dialogue and Resolution, which is based in Eugene, Community Dispute Resolution Center. So the question of kind of what does restorative justice look like in our program? We've got a few kind of branches. We're a community mediation center at the root, but we all have had a pretty robust restorative justice program for for quite a few years working on diversion cases with Lane County, with the DA's office, and also with the Department of Youth Services in a few different ways, working on diversion for youth offenses. More recently, we have been developing a lot of pretty strong ties with schools and school districts around up and down the I-5 corridor, really, helping schools to rethink how they do discipline, how they think about the word discipline, and really trying to address the pretty long and clear history of disproportionality that with which exclusionary discipline is used. So students of color are significantly more likely to be suspended and expelled, for example, for the same kind of behaviors in schools as white kids. And so that school to prison pipeline is pretty evident. There's a lot of clear research that demonstrates that. So we're trying to address that by looking at some structural changes in how schools think about discipline, and building some skills within school staff around kind of basic conflict resolution, and also helping to inform some of the structures of how things get handled within a school. And I just kind of want to underscore something Stephen said a minute ago, because I just want to echo that idea that it's often easy to think about RJ as a tool, but it's a way of being and a path. And the indigenous roots of the model are really important to call in as well. The very idea that everything that we do is interconnected, that when one person does something to harm another or to support another, that has impacts on everybody around in that community, and that everything that we do really needs to be measured according to how it's going to impact the next 7 generations. That's how I was taught, and that's how I try to walk in that way too. So I just wanted to call that in as well, because I think that as we talk about systems and the kind of skills and the work that we do, it's important to keep that really at the center.
Great, thank you, Darren. I think I'll stick with you first for this next question. Everyone has sort of touched on the paradigm shift that is necessary to take place. So while we know that restorative justice is good for communities, it's good for really everyone, what talking points would you say, and then we'll turn it over to whoever else has something to chime in here. What talking points do you think are most helpful when trying to convince people who believe in punitive justice models, recidivism rates, smaller dockets, maybe victim satisfaction, others that you might have come across in your work?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a really good one. We're in an interesting time, I think, in schools and in school politics, where there's just such a bifurcated kind of view of addressing historical harms, racial harms, and understandings of how we respond to unwelcome behavior or even harmful behavior within a school system. And I'm going to start with schools. One of the places where I often start conversations around RJ is around the idea of accountability. I think for folks who maybe have this sense that that to hold somebody accountable for something that they might have done or a harm that they might have committed means that something has to happen to them, that's what accountability means, or that thinking about victims and victims' rights, and within how the system or how an authority addresses a harm or prescribes a punishment. If all we have to do is kind of scratch that surface of that definition of accountability a little bit, and we start having conversations about, well, what does that really mean? What does it look like to actually be accountable to somebody that you've done harm to? Does it look like just removing that person, or actually having them participate in repairing what was harmed? And on the victim side, if somebody has been harmed, how often is a punitive model really allow for somebody who has been harmed to have a voice in what the response is and have some input? So that's a place where I start when you're asking about talking points. I think all of those things that you mentioned on the court side, recidivism, victim satisfaction, those are all valid and valuable. But I like with schools, I like to talk about accountability first and actually ask some questions about what do we really mean when we say that.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we do have some questions in here about accountability, but I want to first turn, we'll turn to John, and then we'll go to our public defenders and Stephen. What would you say in your work are some talking points that might be helpful in getting people who are more in favor of a punitive form of justice into restorative justice?
Yeah, my elevator speech. We should all have one, right? For RJ. Mine starts out with a juxtaposition. So just, our traditional Western criminal justice system asks 3 questions. What rule was broken, who broke it, and what punishment did they deserve? Going back to Stephen's comment about paradigm switching, RJ is a completely different paradigm, right? It's what happened, who was impacted, and what needs to happen to make things right. So we really change the equation when we ask different questions at the outset. I would echo what Darren said, accountability. I try to talk about the balance between support and accountability. And the fact, we get in these politically charged discussions about who's tough on crime, who's soft on crime. An RJ response is smart on crime. It's focused on relationships and individuals. And it's also something that transcends our criminal justice system. It can be applied in multiple contexts, but it's the same principles there, I think. I think accountability does, in many ways, transcend political ideology. I think it's something that we can all, as humans, get behind if we have a thoughtful conversation about what that looks like, and if we talk about how we integrate support with accountability. So that's generally how I try to talk about it.
Great, thank you. So I noticed our conversation has shifted a little bit more towards accountability. So including the last question, I'll turn to Tucker and Tristen. So many proponents of the carceral system argue that we need to imprison people in order for them to be held accountable. How do you view accountability in what you do, and how you can help with restorative justice and holding people accountable?
I can take a crack at this first. So, I think it's an interesting argument first to think about that, prisons, the carceral system as a vehicle to accountability. And I guess what I would say is that, I sit in courtrooms every day where people use the word accountability, and especially after sitting in restorative justice space for so long, it has made me realize that the use of the word accountability when we use it within the criminal legal context is completely meaningless. Especially from the standpoint of an attorney, when I think about, what avenues are available to my clients for being accountable, the criminal legal system really creates barriers to all of them. So when you think about, if you've done something wrong, what encourages you to be able to come around to that? One major thing could be talking to people that you love, who support you, friends, family, things of that nature. You cannot do that if you have been charged with a crime. For one, if you are incarcerated, all of your phone calls are recorded and the district attorney is listening to all of them. And so if you start opening up to a friend about how you committed this and you feel so bad and you just want to be able to make things right, well, you just made your case, or the state's case for them. So let's say you're not in custody, you're out of custody, and you can go sit with a friend. You can confide in that person and tell them what happened and ask for their advice. Well, you can't do that either, because your attorney is standing over there saying, if you speak to anyone, if you tell anyone anything about your crime, about what you did, assuming that this person is guilty, then the state, if they find that information, can even subpoena best friend to come into court and say, yeah, my best friend told me that he did X, Y, and Z. This idea that if you talk to the cops and you're honest up front, that's really going to help you. Just lay it all on the table in the beginning, and then the DA is really going to care about that and go easy on you. Total lies. That is just absolutely incorrect. And in fact, if you confess, that is like one of the best pieces of evidence that the state has. And a lot of what determines what kinds of offers people get is how best if the state can prove their case. And so there are all these barriers to saying that you did something. And even when you think about the first appearance that somebody makes, so when they come in through an arraignment, I've had people say, I want to plead guilty. I did it. I don't know why I would say not guilty. And I tell them, the judge isn't even going to hear you if you try to say those words. Everybody who comes through here pleads not guilty, which is why I think it's always funny when the news always reports the next day and says like so-and-so pleaded not guilty. It's like literally they have no other option. This isn't about taking accountability. It is about your attorney going through your case, trying to find whatever he or she can to get you a good deal, to get you a good defense. Even if you are guilty, that is the road that you go to. And the reason for that is because on the other side of actually demonstrating genuine accountability are harsher prison sentences and more punishment and shame as well. And so there are so many barriers that the system creates to even being able to say, I want to hold myself accountable. And it's a huge disservice to the people who have been hurt by those crimes. Because a lot of times what they want is to have some sort of explanation, to have some just information about what happened to them and why it happened. And that is really the one thing that they cannot have within the criminal legal system. Or sorry, that is one of many things that people who have been harmed cannot have within the criminal legal system. And just to give you kind of a story, a little anecdote, I was covering an arraignment shift about a month or two ago, and there was a murder case that was being arraigned. And there was a woman who came into the courtroom. She was the mother of the decedent in the case, and she was very emotional. She was crying, and she was looking at the man who was being charged, and she was saying, how could you do this? I need to understand, why do you have the right to do this? I need you to look me in the face and tell me why this happened. And of course, the attorneys were rushing over to him saying, don't say anything, don't say anything. The judge was trying to explain to her, he cannot say anything. He can never say anything to you. You can never have this conversation that you're seeking. And as the man who had been charged was leaving the courtroom, I heard him say, I'm so sorry. And it just really demonstrated to me the barriers and the obstacles that are created by the criminal legal system for this genuine human engagement. You know, when we think of how do we resolve issues within our own life. And I think that, yeah, when it comes to restorative justice, I know there are other folks on this call who can speak much more beautifully to how accountability is achieved through that process. But what I can say is within the criminal legal system, there isn't even an option for trying to have an honest conversation about what happened most of the time. And if someone, you know, to stand up and say, I'm guilty after your attorney has very carefully negotiated every part of the deal, that's not accountability. And we trick ourselves into thinking that it is, so that we can continue with this system that harms people and does not help people. Sorry, that's my alarm.
Great. Thank you so much, Tristen. Okay, Tucker.
I don't know if everyone saw me just nodding along with everything Tristen was saying, but I think I agree with literally everything you just said. I would just add that to the extent that the criminal justice's definition of accountability is a guilty plea and an acknowledgement of the truth of the allegations in a charging instrument, which is pretty much what it is. That is, at least in Lane County, typically a prerequisite to some sort of restorative justice resolution. So if we negotiate, let's say a DA diversion that includes some sort of engagement with Center for Dialogue and Resolution, then to get to a spot where you can even take advantage of that resolution, you have to go before a judge and enter a guilty plea, which locks you in. It means that it's sink or swim now. You either engage in that program or you come back before the judge and you get sentenced because you just entered a guilty plea. So it kind of, in some ways, takes some wind out of the sails of the process, in the sense that you have this axe hanging over your head, and you either get with the program or you get to go to jail. So it's unfortunate that that's how it's set up, and that's what our statutes require, but it's how we've constructed the system. So
Yeah, thank you. So it sounds like we have some juxtaposition, as I believe one of our panelists mentioned earlier, between what's happening in restorative justice and what's happening in the criminal legal system. So I would like to ask now, what are some reasons, and I will turn this to Stefan, what are some reasons that people choose to participate in a restorative justice program? What does the person who was harmed get out of it? And what was the person who harmed them get out of it?
Yeah, I wasn't ready for that switch. I had so many answers to the last question, but
Okay, well then we can, that's okay. This is it's a fluid process. You can answer the last question as well.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to do this as concise as my brain will allow. I just wanted to come from a different angle, because I did hear the word like convince in that like question. And it's, so first off, like, if I'm standing across from someone, I want to know like where are they coming from? Because all the things that all of y'all just said are amazing. These are the answers, right? We know how to show these, but are we talking to folks who are not in a space to understand, listen, or even care enough? Then that changes my approach, right? So the reason why I'm saying all this, and I love little analogies, so I have one, is because my first like 5 years in restorative justice as a restorative justice specialist, I found my work was very much running to schools, trying to convince people why this stuff works. And then that became the work, not the actual work, but the work was, oh, I have to explain to the system partners. Oh, I have to explain to the teachers, to the educators. Oh, I have to explain to the parents, to the family. Like the convincing became the job. And then there was turmoil in my spirit, because it turned from, oh, this is, and here's the analogy. I always use this, and it is, I love it. You know, when they say you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Our society, and it's in so many ways, but also in the RJ world, like we have, it's no longer asking people to come to the water to drink or guiding people. We're all running around with our own buckets of water, trying to throw it in other people's faces. Like, you need to drink this water. Mine's better than yours. This is why. And so we are no longer bringing folks, are suggesting, and in this analogy alone, like saved me from that internal turmoil, because I realized that there's some folks that just fundamentally don't believe this, right? And is it our job to try to convince folks, or is it our job to do the work and then let the stories speak for themselves? Because the only way you change hearts and minds, or even systemic structure, is by having evidence, right? And so like I can argue all day with someone around how this work looks, but if they are not in a space to care or understand, or if they're very much set in the punitive ways, maybe it's a conversation on like, well, where did that punitive identity for you come from? And then we can talk about we can talk about oppressive systems. We can talk about how we've all like embodied these things in order to navigate this system of oppression. Or we can stop throwing our water at people and like just, hey, I have wonderful water over here. You could come try it. It's got a little lemon in it. You know, it's good for the spirit, for the soul. And also I see that you got your own water over there. I'm not gonna knock it. If you want to continue to drink that, that is your choice, but just know that my offer over here will always be open. And so this has made me like shift how I move in this space. And I understand that we do have to have conversations and we do have to, but if it is to the point of falling upon ears that will not hear, to me, there's a moment when we have to like do the work or and then be able to provide stories. So that's my my analogy of the water. And then I really appreciate what you said, Tristen, about like having, when you're talking about accountability and like having loved ones, close ones near, to like talk through like these things. We have so many people probably don't even have those loved ones, right? They probably don't even have people that they can like just let go with due to life circumstances, events, lack of access. And to me, this community-based work is like giving folks who didn't have or lost those things a reminder of their humanity in a place that 100% tries to snatch it away from you. So I know we talk about like sending people to prison and accountability, but like 95% of people that are incarcerated are coming back home. And that's a lot of people, you know? And if the measurement of accountability isn't touching people's spirits, their souls, or their ability to like look internally and really see themselves and see the community and world around them, then that is the mechanism for recidivism, right? Like that is how you just release people to go right back. And so like, yeah, I wholeheartedly believe that like once you give folks a reminder of humanity, and things can change and shift. But again, we have to understand that everyone comes from a different place. And so the goal, and even in the equitable practices and restorative justice, is like meeting people where they're at and reminding them that that is also okay where you're at. You know, like there's so much shame, guilt around not being able to do certain things in our society due to, again, oppressive systems. And to me, this work is a reminder, reminding of what love, maybe you never understood what love felt like in a way. Maybe you never understood what care from a community looked like in a way. Maybe you never felt like you belong somewhere. And so this is why you show up the way you do, like who knows, but along this process, we're gonna hold you. And to me, that's how folks get to accountability inside themselves and be able to share it out. And like, I can't even tell you how many people that I knew that was incarcerated was like, I just want to send a letter to the person that I hurt. And like, I don't even know their name. I can't do anything. They won't allow it. People have got out 10 years, 15 years, and they can't send a letter to apologize or do anything. Like the system currently doesn't allow for that kind of real accountability. And this is why this work is so important, bringing those folks together. So then I'll end it on, what do folks get from this process? And it's literally that, like, the person who is harmed has so many questions sometimes, have so many unanswered things that could lead to pain, trauma, and then like spiraled out if you don't allow a process for them to heal. And so like this restorative work is healing work on all parties. If you sit across from someone and ask, why did you hurt me? Like, I don't know why, what, but this is what happened and this is how I felt. Like, those crack open like some real deep-hearted and like vulnerable spaces for folks. And like, these are the kind of conversations that will bring humanity out and then allow folks to see why they either did what they did, and maybe even why they won't do this again, because now I have a connection to the community that I didn't think that I had before. Okay, I said concise as my brain could be, and now it was not concise at all. So I will give it back to you.
That was beautiful, and it was very well said. Thank you, Stephen. I heard a lot in there about the cycle of harm and the importance of vulnerability and recognizing when harm is done. And since we have two people here who work with juvenile justice and sort of implementing restorative justice in schools, I, as someone who has worked to disrupt this cycle of harm from the beginning by working with public school students, Darren, I'll start with you and then we'll turn to John. Can you share a little bit about the cycle of harm and how you see it and how restorative justice can interrupt it at its very beginnings?
Yeah, there are a lot of layers to that question, and I think one way of thinking about it, I think, is it gets to the root of what the word discipline means. If we go back to to its Latin roots, discipline is all about learning. It comes from the discipulus, which means a student or a learner. And so if discipline isn't about education and helping to understand where things are coming from, then it's something else. And we should be clear about that if it's that something else. So there's that kind of abstract philosophical approach, but on the more concrete and lived and felt, when a young person is figuring out how their power works and how to interact with other people and how to get their needs met, we do all kinds of things. I mean, I don't know about you all, but I learned my most valuable lessons usually by hurting somebody else and then going, oh crap, I just hurt somebody and now I gotta do something to try to fix it or feel shame about it. And if we don't get some help understanding that, or if we don't have some trusted adults around who can help us kind of understand how one thing led to that, then there's the path ahead looks a lot different than if we do have that support. And so the data is really clear that when a young person is excluded, receives a behavior referral and sent to the office, that starts a pattern that is really clearly correlated to a reduction in the likelihood that student will graduate from high school. If a student receives one suspension by the time they're in the 9th grade, they're several factors more likely to be incarcerated later on. And those are correlations, right? It's really hard to look at the data and prove causality, but the correlations are really strong and the data is preponderous. So it's very clear that exclusionary discipline doesn't do what it's supposed to do, or at least that what we've been told that it's supposed to do, which is probably to make schools safer. That's usually what's held up as a reason for exclusionary discipline. And I'm talking, office referrals, suspensions, expulsions, things like that. The evidence is really clear. It doesn't do that. So why should we keep doing it? But the impacts on young people too, I think, in terms of helping to understand and helping to learn and internalize what the needs were that led to doing whatever they did. What were they trying to accomplish? Asking some questions like that, and especially if it's founded on that foundation of building relationships with human beings and building trust and respect within a school community, then we have a lot more opportunity to learn how we impact each other, and that's really the goal. And it's rare to find any kind of systems that really support that, but we're working on it.
Good. Seems like we have some great people working on it. Okay, John, same question to you. I saw you taking some notes there. and then we'll turn one last question to everyone else. We're a little pressed for time, but I would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I was trying to scribble down how I can try to sound as eloquent as Darren. There's a data analytic answer to this, and then there's kind of a heart answer. And I think, as Darren said, the data on this is in. But I'll just briefly mention, there's been a lot of studies, and Stephen made this point that we need to have evidence. So the evidence is in. 2006, American Psychological Association went through and looked at zero tolerance paradigm. It just said in every case, it's not only not working, it's harmful, right? 2011, Breaking Schools Rules, which is a very large study that studied almost 1 million school students longitudinally over 7 years, said everything that Darren just said. Not only is one suspension set a young person on a certain trajectory, but that risk is exponentially greater with each episode of school pushout. And I certainly saw this working for the Oregon Department of Education, how hard it is to get students re-engaged, particularly those who have been expelled. But there's a heart piece to this too, which is just thinking about the trajectory. And, these students we often use the term at risk in school systems. They are maybe harder on teachers. They're challenging. They have all kinds of trauma backgrounds, and they have behaviors. Those are the kids we need to hold on to the most tightly, and we really can affect trajectory in a very big way at an early age. And so, the pipeline metaphor is, I think, the best metaphor we have. The school to prison pipeline is not just an educational problem; it is a civil rights issue. It's a civic engagement issue that we have in this country. And so we have an opportunity to imagine what we want tomorrow to look like in terms of how we educate our young people, and this social emotional learning that comes along with a restorative approach, I think, is the answer to depolarizing the society in which we currently live.
Great, thank you. Okay, really quick, I want to give everyone a chance to answer this last concluding question. I think we touched on it a little bit. We'll stick with you, John. What is your vision for restorative justice in the future? And then we'll move it on down.
Yeah, that's a great question. A world where restorative justice is no longer a fringe movement, and I actually really believe that we're getting there. I think the restorative justice train has left the station. I think it's flourishing locally, nationally, internationally. I think it will continue to do so. It is not a new fad. It is a movement. So I would love to see a tomorrow where not just our criminal justice system has this philosophy as part of the brick and mortar, but that it really transcends our criminal justice systems. And we see it in schools, and we see it in organizations, and we see it in government, where we have a much more relationally based way of connecting and engaging in repairing harm and resolving conflicts. And I think that's, part of our job is to educate the leaders of tomorrow and using these approaches as alternatives. And so I think if we continue to do that, we'll chip away at this, and it will hopefully eventually just become kind of part of the paradigm of how we relate to each other.
Great. Tucker?
My answer to that question is far more specific and less, I'm not casting a wide net. I just want to convince the prosecutors at the Lane County District Attorney's Office that these resolutions make sense, that they are better for all involved parties, and that they should green light them whenever possible. Because I find myself frequently making pitches to both prosecutors and the court for restorative justice aimed processes and resolutions that are just scoffed at and noses are turned up. And it just, it's too bad. I mean, we have a statutory mechanism for civil compromise, where basically a named victim can submit an acknowledgement of satisfaction to the court, and we would ask the court to go ahead and dismiss the case regardless of what the prosecutor thinks. And I'd say that is far less successful than it should be in the court system that I work in. I see a lot of judges saying, nope, I'm not going to do that. And it's like, why? Like, we've done all of this legwork to make it so that this harm has been addressed to the satisfaction of the named victim. And you're still saying, no, this person needs to suffer, because sometimes I guess the process is the punishment, right? They need to keep coming back to court over and over and over again, and missing work, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So anyway, that is all to say, my goal is to keep trying to pitch these resolutions, and hopefully people will start getting on board.
Thank you. Tristen?
Yeah, I think I'll follow John's lead with the big picture ideas. I think it's really, I think that one of the most amazing things about restorative justice is the fact that, like Stephen was saying earlier, it's not just, a diversion from the system. It is a philosophy, it is a way of life, and it really can inspire a culture change. And really at the root of so many of our social justice issues is this need to have a significant change in our culture, in the way that we perceive people in need and the way that we perceive people who have committed harm. And it kind of just brings me back to those kind of like two different sets of questions that John was talking about. Do we want to live in a society where the way that we approach harm is through punishment and isolation and shame? Or do we want to live in a society where we base our systems and the things that make us good, in love and compassion and community and healing? And restorative justice really invites people to recognize that that is a possibility, that we can, someone can commit harm in our community and still be a full member of our community who is empowered to right the wrongs that they have done. And in so doing, can really be vested in our community as well. And it kind of transcends all of our different systems. I mean, it's any time that we are approaching a harm. Even I think about how within treatment centers, there are very, very few inpatient alcohol and drug treatment centers that are even available for the people who need them. And I've gotten many clients into these treatment centers, and the rules are so strict that one misstep and you're out, because that is our system that, our criminal legal system has modeled a punitive system for everyone who is trying to address harm. And so instead of, trying to understand what brought that person to maybe make a mistake, they're back on the streets, back in their addiction, back ready to have access to whatever, substances they've been using, and it's not a solution. And I see, kind of overlaps with even the environmental justice movement, and kind of just the way that we think about our community and needing to care for one another, that basic fact. And even, a small example like wearing masks for COVID-19, a small thing that can help a lot of people. It is our culture. Our culture is the reason that there's so much politicization around just doing even a small thing to help the people around you. And so, I think when I think of, what are the big impacts of restorative justice, I imagine, just a completely different way that we are addressing harm in our community and the massive ripple out effects that it could have to really every element of how our society functions and how we function with each other interpersonally as a result. So big dreams for the future. Glad to be working alongside folks like Stephen.
Amazing. Okay, I am so very sorry to Darren and Stephen, but we've got to get out of this room, unfortunately. I appreciate you all. We appreciate you all so much for being here. We will be in touch. You've all said such beautiful, inspiring things. And thank you again. We look forward to speaking with you and working with you in the future. And it has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And please have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne.
Well,
Thanks, everyone.
well, yeah.